Next, I'd like to turn our attention toward usage. On the usage tab, you'll see that we have multiple different categories that we are interested in. Starting from the left on the radio buttons, we have system, we have query origin information, we have query type information, table access, and database information. I'll be stepping through each one of these individually. Next, I'd like to draw your attention to the middle of the screen. As you can see, we have a dashboard that shows for each system, development, production, and UAT, what the query count was, what the query duration was, and what the query queue was. We also have average queue and average query information as well. You'll see we can also look at percentages to each other, what the percentage to total was. One new function that we've added is in the time series. You'll see we are now time series and trending 3 different values. In this case, we're in production, we're looking at query count, query duration, and query queue. This is very important to note, and we'll use the slider again to hone in on some of these specific dates. You'll see in production, for example, in this particular day on June 22nd, we had a fairly significant spike in query count where we hit over 200,000 queries for the day. You'll also notice we have a corresponding query duration that's also increased that day as well. Of equal importance is the query queue itself. You'll see there's a fairly significant spike. Therefore, just with a few mouse clicks, we identified on a specific day where query queue did spike based on some activity that was going on in the system, and we can drill into the individual reports and look at exactly who is using the system and in what fashion that day. To further this point, I'd like to look at the UAT system. Again, using our time slider, I'm going to shrink the data range, and therefore we can look at just a couple week snapshot of data here and address what's going on. So you can see on July 12th we had another spike of query count in UAT. What's important to note though is the query duration and query queue remained relatively flat, and we know the system was still running in pretty good shape that day. However, if you look to the left of this time series, you'll see on July 3rd we had another fairly significant query count spike of 187,000 query for the day, but the system did react a little bit differently. Number one, the query duration spiked way up as well, and number two, the query queue spiked up as well. So on July 3rd, we know that there was probably some interaction that had impacts on queue, and I would not be surprised if you as the user identifying this noticed a higher uptick in trouble tickets that specific day. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about query origin. What query origin allows us to do is to look at, from a user perspective, what type of system interaction there is. You'll see for any given day, again, this is all driven by a calendar, you have the ability to look at a specific user in a specific system and see what their query count was. You can also track that user over time and see what type of volatility and trending they have. Therefore, as you can see with this specific demo user, NZ Observe Deck, since about June 27th, it's remained fairly flat. Before then, it was quite volatile with a lot of peaks and valleys. Within query type, the next radio button, you can see that you can start looking at what types of queries are hitting the system. You'll see a middle column here called system query type, with the values such as SEL for select, INS for insert, UPD for updates, so on and so forth. You also see to the far left here, the bar graph now shows what your percentage to the overall query count was for a given query type. So we know 37% of our overall total queries within the entire Netezza system were select statements within the production environment. Again, just like all the other dashboards, you can review this data in a time series fashion and start making sense of it. Table access takes that similar type of information that we've shown you from a user level, and now we can look at it from a table perspective. What tables are being hit the most and how often? Therefore, you can see in this specific example, we have one record in orange in user acceptance testing. This particular table has been hit 6,019 times on this specific day. Underneath, you can see the trend line, what's been going on with this table, and you can see it remained fairly flat until a spike in early July, and then went down close to nothing, and then has had an uptick in activity over the last couple weeks. You can also look at the bar graph very quickly and see what the percentage is to the total query count for this specific table. Finally, on the usage dashboards, this is a dashboard called database that clearly shows you how many days since a database has last been queried. This is very important to know when you start looking at capacity issues and cleaning up data. Knowing what databases have been queried and used is an important factor. Here you'll see our very top production system database here has not been queried for 464 days. And you can, by looking at the trend line, look exactly when the last time it was specifically accessed. And you can see back on June 9, 2010, it was queried 86 times. However, since then, you have a significant drop off, and therefore, it's been over a year since it was last queried. It might be a strong candidate to clean up. For the next few minutes, I'd like to look at some of the specific detailed reports that we can pull from the system. All our detail reports come equipped with nice, easy to use prompts that allow you to look at a selection of data over time. In this case, I'm going to look at today's queries and all query statuses for all environments. And I'm going to go ahead and run this report. You can see now the report is shown for this specific day, all the different actual query IDs that have run for a given day. So starting from the top, you can see in development we had a query ID that ran at 3:30 in the afternoon that was successful, and it will have duration information, query estimated information around what the cost of the query is going to be, how it impacted queue, what the result rows looked like, how many rows were touched, how many snippets were run, so on and so forth. It's also important to note that any of these with the hyperlinks can drill down, and so therefore if you wanted to look at this specific query ID individually, you could drill down into this report and look at what tables and what type of query it was. Next, I'd like to discuss a little bit about visualization. Visual Insights is a new tool that MicroStrategy just came out with a few months ago. We've already implemented it, and it's a perfect use case of our subscription model that this tool will change and continue to enhance over time. And here we are just a couple months into use, and we've already introduced introduce this tool. So bear with me with this one. I know it's a lot of color to look at at first, but I think it will make you clearly understand what the value is here. What we're looking at here is a planning heat map. For any average day of the week, so you'll see we have days in here: Tuesday, Friday, Thursday, Monday, so on and so forth. You'll see the average usage look at a specific week. So in this case, you'll see that we have rectangle colors, and you have the hue map down here. Blue is the less in the query queue, and orange is the most. And we have a rectangle size. The bigger the rectangle, the more query counts it's had. Therefore, what this planning heat map could be used is, let's say you as the user has been tasked to identify a space and time where you can introduce a long-running ETL job and know that you're not going to have an adverse impact on any other component within the system and increase the likelihood of success. You could pull up a heat map similar to this, showing your average data, and make some very easy visual recommendations. Therefore, looking at production only, we can see that Tuesday has a very high orange rectangle size for this admin user. In other words, what we know from this is the admin user on Tuesday has a very high query queue statistic and has a very high query count. If you hover over it, you can see that the admin user is averaging about 252,000 queries per day on Tuesday and has a very significant query queue associated with that. So you as the user would know that Tuesday probably is not an ideal candidate to introduce a new ETL job. On the flip side, you can see that Sunday is a very small box in general compared to the other boxes, and there's no orange whatsoever. It's all the very lightest blue. You can also see that the admin user, which is the largest user on some of the other days, is fairly small compared to the rest of the admin users on a given week. Therefore, you can make a very easy recommendation that on Sunday, the total query count is only averaging about 33,000 and has a fairly insignificant query queue, and therefore makes sense to introduce an ETL job on Sunday. With that, I would like to thank everyone for attending today. As you can see, there's a lot that we do cover within the observation deck, and again, it's impossible in a web session like this to show each and every feature and function. But I hope I have at least introduced you to its power